Today, we are going back in time. We're going to a single day that completely redrew the map of the world. A day when a city that had stood for 1,000 years, the symbol of an entire civilization, faced its final, desperate hours.
I mean, just think about that for a second. In the span of one sunrise to one sunset, an empire that saw itself as the direct heir to ancient Rome was just gone. The walls of Constantinople, walls people thought were literally indestructible, were finally broken. So the real question isn't just what happened, it's how. How on earth could an empire that survived everything, crusades, plagues, civil wars, how could it finally fall?
You see, this is so much more than a story about one siege. It's about the clash between the old world and the new. It's about the terrifying power of brand new technology. And it's about how deep political divisions can bring even the mightiest powers to their knees. The shockwaves from this one event literally helped kickstart the Renaissance and the Age of Exploration. It's a massive turning point in history, and we're going to break it all down.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the crumbling empire inside Constantinople. Then we'll meet the brilliant young sultan who was obsessed with taking it. We'll get into the game-changing weapon he brought with him, relive the brutal final siege, and then explore how its fall changed everything.
All right, so to really get the fall of Constantinople, you first have to understand the city itself. By the 1450s, people still called it the Queen of Cities, but honestly, it was a ghost. A magnificent, beautiful ghost of its former glory. To feel the stakes here, you have to get the symbolism. This wasn't just another city on the map. In the minds of everyone at the time, friends and enemies, this was the last living piece of the Roman Empire, a direct line all the way back to Caesar Augustus. At the same time, it was the absolute spiritual center of Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Think of it like what Rome is to Catholics. So losing it? That wasn't just a military loss, it was a spiritual apocalypse. And look, the final collapse didn't just happen overnight. It was the end of a long, slow bleed that had been going on for centuries. The deepest cut, the one it never recovered from, came back in 1204. And you know who did it? Not some foreign enemy, but fellow Christians. Knights of the Fourth Crusade sacked their own religious allies, a betrayal that shattered the empire's economy and spirit. After that, you had decades of nasty civil wars that tore it apart from the inside, all while the rising Ottoman Empire was just slowly, methodically, gobbling up all the land around it.
And this map just says it all, doesn't it? Look at the empire on the left, back in the year 1000. It's huge, a sprawling power. Now look to the right at 1453. It's basically just the city itself. The emperor was in charge of Constantinople and a couple of bits of Greece, and that was about it. The empire had become a tiny little island floating in the middle of a vast Ottoman sea.
Okay, so now let's flip the coin. Let's look at what's happening outside the walls. Because while the Byzantine Empire was fading away, a new energetic power was on the rise. And it was led by a young man who was about to change everything, Sultan Mehmed II.
Now, if you're picturing some crude warlord, just erase that image from your mind. Mehmed II was a Renaissance man. He was highly educated, spoke multiple languages, and was a serious student of history. He pored over the campaigns of Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar, and he absolutely saw himself as their equal. And since he was a boy, he had one single, all-consuming obsession, taking Constantinople. For him, this wasn't just about land, it was about destiny.
And his plan was just brilliant. He was patient. He didn't just charge in. First, he built a massive fortress, Rumeli Hisari, right on the Bosphorus Strait, practically thumbing his nose at the city. This move gave him total control of the waterway, cutting the city off from any help from the Black Sea. Then he bulked up his navy to block it from the sea. And then the masterstroke. He used diplomacy to make sure the city's potential allies, like Hungary, would just sit on their hands. Here's the key takeaway. Long before the first cannon was fired, Mehmed had already put the city in a chokehold. The battle was practically won.
And this really gets to the heart of his motivation. For Mehmed and the Ottomans, Constantinople was this annoying, defiant Christian island sitting right in the middle of their growing empire. It was a strategic headache, sure, but more than that, it was a symbol. If he could conquer the legendary Second Rome, it would cement his empire as a true world power. It would legitimize his rule in the eyes of the entire world, forever. So you have a dying city on one side and a brilliant, ambitious sultan on the other. But Mehmed had an ace up his sleeve, a technological advantage that would make 1,000 years of military defense totally obsolete. That advantage was gunpowder. Seriously, just try to wrap your head around that. A single cannonball weighing 1,200 pounds. That's like a small cow being fired through the air to smash into a wall. These weren't just cannons, they were monsters.
One of them, the Great Bombard, was built by an engineer named Orban. And here's the irony. He first offered his services to the Byzantines. They couldn't afford him. Mehmed could. The sound alone was a weapon of terror.
But here's the thing that most people miss about these cannons. Their real impact wasn't just about knocking down one city's walls. No, it was about changing the very nature of power and safety, forever.
See, for centuries, the basic rule of warfare was simple. If you were behind a big stone wall, you were safe. Sieges weren't about fighting, they were about waiting for the people inside to starve. Gunpowder just blew that entire idea to pieces. Suddenly, the mightiest walls in the world could be turned into rubble. And the Siege of Constantinople was the moment the entire world learned that lesson. After 1453, no castle, no fortress, no walled city on earth was ever truly safe again. It was the end of an era.
And that brings us to the siege itself. For 53 days, the fate of the world hung in the balance. It was a desperate, brutal struggle of fire, faith, and pure, grinding exhaustion.
I mean, just look at the numbers. The Ottomans showed up with an army of at least 80,000 soldiers. And the defenders? Maybe 7,000 on a good day. They were outnumbered more than 10 to 1. It was this tiny, desperate group of Byzantine soldiers, citizen volunteers, and a few hundred heroic Italian mercenaries fighting for their lives.
But as bad as those odds were, the city's greatest weakness wasn't the Ottoman cannons. It wasn't their massive army. No, the real killer was a deep, bitter poison that had been rotting the city from within for centuries.
This quote, it's just breathtaking, and it tells you everything you need to know. See, in a last-ditch effort to get military help from the West, the Byzantine emperor agreed to unite his Orthodox Church with the Catholic Church in Rome. For many people in the city, this was the ultimate betrayal of their faith. The memory of being sacked by Catholic crusaders was still fresh. They hated the Pope so much that many of them openly said they would rather be ruled by the Muslim Sultan. This religious fight paralyzed the city, it stopped any real help from coming, and it meant the defenders fought their last battle almost completely alone.
So, on the night of May 28th, Mehmed launched his final massive assault, and it was a brilliant, brutal three-wave attack. The first wave was basically cannon fodder, irregular troops sent in to wear down the defenders and absorb their arrows and energy. The second wave was made up of better soldiers, sent to hammer the parts of the wall that were already weak from cannon fire. And then, finally, after hours of fighting had worn the defenders down to the bone, Mehmed played his trump card. His elite, fresh, and ferocious janissaries. They were sent in to deliver the killing blow.
And then in the chaos of that final attack, right before dawn, something happened. A small side gate, the Kirka Porta, was somehow left unlocked. Was it a simple, tragic mistake by a defender who was just too exhausted to think? Or was it something else? A sign that the city's time was just up? Whatever it was, Ottoman soldiers slipped through, raised their flag on the wall, and the sight of it caused total panic. The defensive line just shattered.
And in that final moment, the last Roman emperor, Constantine XI, supposedly tore off his royal purple clothes so he would look like any other soldier. He then charged headfirst into the sea of invaders and died fighting, shoulder to shoulder with his men. And with his death, a line of Roman emperors that stretched back 1,500 years came to a heroic and tragic end.
The battle was over. The empire was gone. But the story of the city? That wasn't over. In fact, in a wild twist of history, the death of Constantinople was also the beginning of its rebirth.
We always think of this moment as just pure destruction, the end of an era. And it was. But that is not the whole story. What happened next is actually way more interesting, because Mehmed had zero interest in being the king of a pile of ashes.
This right here reveals everything about his true ambition. He immediately started calling himself Kaiser e Rome. You know what that means? Caesar of Rome. He didn't see himself as the man who destroyed the Roman Empire. He saw himself as its new inheritor. In his mind, the Ottoman Empire wasn't the destroyer of Rome, it was the next chapter.
And he backed it up with his actions. He immediately started rebuilding the city. He invited people from all over his empire, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, to come and live there. The great cathedral Hagia Sophia was turned into a mosque, a huge symbol of the new reality. But he allowed Christian and Jewish communities to stay and practice their faiths. The city, which would soon become known as Istanbul, was transformed from a dying relic into the vibrant multicultural capital of a powerful new global empire. Now let's zoom out, because the ripples from this one event spread across the whole world. The fall cemented the Ottoman Empire as a superpower.
It also cut off the old land-based trade routes to Asia, which forced countries like Spain and Portugal to find new sea routes, which led directly to Columbus and the Age of Exploration. At the same time, Byzantine scholars fled the city, taking all this ancient Greek knowledge with them to Italy, which poured fuel on the fire of the Renaissance. In fact, many historians use this single event as the official endpoint of the Middle Ages.
So, after all that, what are the big takeaways? I think there are 3 timeless lessons here. First, new technology, in this case cannons, can completely flip the board and change who has the power, almost overnight. Second, your biggest weakness is almost always on the inside. The religious fighting in Constantinople was probably more deadly than any cannon. And third, sometimes symbolic victories matter more than anything else. Capturing Constantinople gave Mehmed a kind of legitimacy and legacy that taking a dozen other cities never could have.
But really, here's the most important thing to remember. That final dramatic battle was just the last page of the story. The real fall happened slowly, over hundreds of years of bad decisions, betrayals, and slow decay. History rarely happens in a single bang. It's usually a long, slow grind that finally reaches a violent, dramatic breaking point.
And that leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. The people of Constantinople believed their walls were eternal. They were wrong. So it makes you wonder, what walls in our own world, whether they're technological, political, or cultural, do we think are permanent? What new forces, what new cannons are grinding away at them right now, pushing them toward a breaking point that we might not see until it's far too late?
This is The Explainer. If you want to keep connecting the dots of the past to better understand the present, subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that made our world. As always, keep expanding your knowledge in all directions.